This time look at 5 more fabulous 3-cylinder motorcycles. Be it 2-stroke or 4-stroke, there's something very intoxicating about the sound of a 3-cylinder motorcycle engine. No matter what firing order is used, you know when you hear the engine coming, there's something special on the way. And so here are 5 more fabulous 3-cylinder motorcycles. Motor Becane 350. Motor Becane was, for many years, France's largest motorcycle company. Before the war they produced side valve and overhead valve 4-strokes. After the war they became very famous for their smaller bikes, 125 and 50cc in particular. However, in 1974 they took the plunge and unveiled their 3-cylinder 2-stroke motorcycle. It was available as a 350 or a 500cc, with the 350 making a claimed 37 horsepower. Motor Becane were betting big on this bike. It included a Lockheed disc, 5-speed gearbox and automatic oiling. So very advanced by the standards of the time. It was even one of the first European bikes to employ electronic ignition too. With neat, very continental styling and well riding position, the machine was very light also, so it could lift its front wheel at the merest provocation. This was a bike very much like that of the Kawasaki's. But unfortunately one area where they couldn't match Kawasaki was that of price. As a result, sales were very disappointing. Alejandro Di Tommaso did briefly buy the company in the late 70s, Di Tommaso having previously acquired Benelli and of course Motor Guzzi over in Italy. But the company would still fail and would later be nationalised, before being bought up by Yamaha, who would abbreviate the name to MBK. As MBK, they would sell really Yamaha designed rebadged scooters. This would continue for many years until fairly recently when the MBK badge was allowed to die, and these days all the bikes produced at the factory are badged as Yamahas. With the exception of a slightly dodgy gearbox, the Motor Becane was an engineering masterpiece. Unfortunately, it was also a sales failure, the price being just too high compared to the Japanese opposition. This means that the bikes are extremely rare these days, so trying to pick one up is incredibly difficult, particularly in Britain where I don't believe the bikes are even officially imported. But even in their native France, the bikes are still very hard to come by. But what a glorious last hurrah for one of the great old French motorcycle companies. The MV Augusta F3. MV Augusta is of course a name highly associated with competition, being the most successful Grand Prix team of all time. In the 60s they replaced their 4-cylinder 500s with a 3-cylinder bike. This was lighter and narrower and allowed them to stay on top for a few extra years. But MV Augusta's road bike, the 750S, had an engine that was based much more on the old 4-cylinder bike of the 1950s and early 60s. But by the time that bike appeared, the glory days were over for MV Augusta, because by the mid-70s the 2-stroke invasion had begun, and the paddock would ring to the sound of 2-strokes for the next few decades. MV clung on and even won their last world title in 1975, and would be the final 500cc 4-stroke Grand Prix champion. But the end of Grand Prix racing would see dark times for MV Augusta. The 750S was a commercial failure, being extraordinarily beautiful, but not particularly reliable and eye-wateringly expensive all at the same time. And by the end of the 70s, it was all over for MV Augusta. That is of course until the Castiglione brothers acquired the name and brought it back to life, initially with the F4 750. The 750 ran a very short stroke and was a real screamer, and not particularly well suited to road work. To combat this, they enlarged the engine out to 1000cc, particularly by increasing the length of the stroke, making the bike much more usable. And with this, they had much more commercial success, and success in superstock racing too. Spurred on by the success of the F4 in racing, the company then went on and developed a 3-cylinder F3 model. This screaming 3-cylinder bike was specifically designed to take on World Supersport, and indeed the little screamer would go on to prove a race winner. Early versions of this achingly beautiful bike would run a 675 engine. Later models would replace this with an 800cc engine, mostly done to offset the effects of emission controls. The machine has gradually evolved during its lifetime, and as well as enlarging the cylinders, there have also been other tuning effects which have greatly increased the power. These days the top of the range model makes just over 140 horsepower claimed. This runs through a 6-speed gearbox to some very light set of wheels with some very sticky rubber on the back too. With that curvaceous bodywork and 3 stubby exhausts sticking out of the side, this is a truly beautiful motorcycle, and one which many will aspire to own. The Triumph Daytona 955. The Triumph Daytona 955i was launched initially as the T595 in 1997, but in 1999 the name was changed to the 955i and would stay that until it was deleted from the range. The bike was launched in an attempt to attack the sports bike market. The earlier Daytonas had of course used a spine frame, and this was a generational leap forward from those machines. The original Kawasaki influenced motor was replaced by a completely new engine design which had been developed with the assistance of Lotus engineering. Early versions ran an 11.2 to 1 compression ratio. This was raised even higher to 12 to 1 on later machines. This fuel injected motor was then mated to a 6-speed gearbox and placed in an all aluminium frame, with a then very fashionable single-sided swinging arm. The styling was truly individualistic, a two-wheel version of a Morgan Plus 4. The Daytona Triple may not have had the performance of a Japanese 4, but it looked different, and sounded different, and really stood out from the crowd. Unfortunately, the later version is a little bit more staid. Okay, it was lighter and a bit more nimble, but unlike the original bike, it just didn't stand out from the crowd, and it didn't grab your attention when you went into a bike dealer. As a result, sales were somewhat disappointing, and the bike was faded from the range in 2006. The Yamaha XR 900. Yamaha introduced the XR 900 in 2016 in an attempt to cash in on the very lucrative neo-retro market. The bike is based on Yamaha's MT-09, known as the FC-09 in North America. It shares the same chassis, most cycle parts, and of course that awesome transverse 3-cylinder engine. The most popular variant of the bike is the 60th anniversary edition. This had upturned forks and that famous black and yellow competition paint job that Yamaha used throughout their racing success of the 60s and 70s, and of course was made most famous by Kenny Roberts in the 1970s. The 3-cylinder motor is of course shared with the MT-09. It's an 840cc liquid-cooled, direct overhead cam, 120-degree crankshaft engine, which produces 115 horsepower at 10,000 RPM. On test, the bike got for the standing quarter mile in 11:07 seconds and has a top speed of just over 122 miles an hour. But given those high bars and the very exposed riding position, I think 122 miles an hour is probably going to be enough. Since introduction, the bike has changed surprisingly little. There have been some special models like the RBAF, and it now supports a quick shifter mechanism. Other than that, the bike has stayed pretty much as when first appeared. And why not? There's really nothing wrong with the bike, so why change it? And of course for Yamaha, the bike has been a sales success, so it's likely to be around for some time yet. Kawasaki KH 250. The 250 version of Kawasaki's famous transverse 3-cylinder 2-stroke arrived in 1972. This of course would have been the learner variant for anybody in the UK at that time. The 250 used the same basic architecture as all the other Kawasaki triples, so it was piston ported with 3 carburetors and 3 shiny chromed exhausts sticking out the back. The bike also shared its engine bottom end and gearbox with the KH400 and the chassis too. This unfortunately meant the bike was actually on the heavy side compared to some of the other 2-stroke opposition, such as Yamaha's RD250 and Suzuki's X7. Compared to those bikes, The little KH was a little down on power at only 28 horsepower and had a claimed top speed of around 90 miles an hour, again a few miles an hour shy of those twin-cylinder opposition. But the Quacker sounded so much more awesome, and is perhaps one of the most exotic learner-legal machines ever offered for sale. The small capacity of the bike meant that it wasn't so badly affected by the fuel crisis of the early 70s, and also it's much easier to get the bike through emission regulations. But unfortunately in 1981, the UK government changed learner laws to 125cc, and that was it for the KH. And from that point onwards, learner bikes got a whole lot less exotic. I do hope you enjoyed our third collection of 3-cylinder motorbikes. Let us know what other collections of bikes or single bikes you'd like to see featured in one of our videos. And if you enjoyed that video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, thank you very much for watching.